This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. A lavish welcome for President Xi Jinping in North Korea. Calling the relationship an invincible friendship, the Chinese leader is deepening ties with a partner of growing strategic importance. At least 19 people have been killed after a powerful earthquake struck off the southern Philippines. Strong aftershocks continue to rattle the region, though tsunami warnings being lifted. Now, as he marks 1 year in office, South Korean President Myung has ordered a probe into ballot shortages that disrupted local elections, with calls growing for a revote. And Asian stocks a sea of red as investors bail out of AI-linked companies that have fueled a surge in the market this year. Also ahead, a dynasty spanning 2,000 years faces a modern dilemma. Japan's imperial family is shrinking fast, with only 3 heirs left. Could new succession rules help secure the future of the throne? A rare high-level visit is underway in Pyongyang as Chinese President Xi Jinping meets North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for talks closely watched across the region. Now, Mr. Xi says that bilateral ties are at a new historical starting point, hailing the relationship as an invincible friendship and pledging closer cooperation. Now, North Korea rolled out the red carpet for the Chinese leader, Mr. Kim, and his wife, Ru Sol-ju, greeting Mr. Xi, and First Lady Peng Liyuan on arrival with a guard of honor. A military band played national anthems, while a 21-gun salute marked the visit. A Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and other senior officials are also accompanying Mr. Xi on the 2-day trip. Well, Mr. Xi says that Beijing aims to strengthen economic and diplomatic ties with Pyongyang. He vowed that both countries will jointly fight against hegemony and attempts to revive militarism that threatens regional security. The visit comes after the Chinese president hosted separate summits with leaders from the United States and Russia. For more, our correspondent Tan Si-hui, she joins us now from Beijing. Si-hui, I know you've been tracking developments very closely. What's the latest coming out of that visit?
Very closely indeed. Very new lines have just dropped out of that meeting between Mr. Xi and Mr. Kim. Mr. Xi saying that he is ready to work with Mr. Kim in terms of developing China and North Korea ties. He also says that there is a firm commitment to safeguard shared interests with North Korea and ensure that the strategic environment will not change. Now, Mr. Xi had also put forward 4 points, and this includes high-level exchanges to consolidate mutual trust, emphasizing that there will be an improvement in level of pragmatic cooperation. He also said that the friendship will be the driving force. There will also be strategic collaboration to safeguard regional peace and development. Mr. Kim, on the other hand, saying that this visit shows that the relationship between North Korea and China is unbreakable, and said that the development of those ties remains the most important strategic path for the country. But interestingly, there was no mention of any nuclear issue at today's press conference with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A journalist had asked whether the nuclear issue will be discussed between Mr. Xi and Mr. Kim, but the spokesperson had said that the position of China on the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula remains stable and consistent, but did not further disclose on the agenda of that meeting. This comes especially as a day before Mr. Xi's meeting, Mr. Kim had been briefed about expanding North Korea's capacity to produce missiles. He had also visited last week a new plant that manufactures nuclear material, and this has implications for both the Korean Peninsula as well as Europe. South Korea watching this closely, wondering if there will be steps taken by North Korea to ensure stability in the Korean Peninsula. Europe also watching closely as North Korea has increasingly become close to Russia, providing aid as well as weapons to Russia.
And so, this visit primarily seen about, strengthening China-North Korean ties. But, essentially, what do both sides hope to achieve?
Well, developing ties will definitely be the primary goal of this visit. But if you look at the significance of the timing, Mr. Xi coming to North Korea, the first time in 7 years, he's also visiting North Korea after back-to-back meetings in Beijing with Mr. Trump, with Mr. Putin. Also, both sides marking 65th anniversary of a mutual defense pact. And so it really shows that China wants to demonstrate that North Korea remains an important ally, also reflecting that this relationship is maturing, is going just beyond symbolism, symbolic affirmation. They're really going into collaboration into specific issues like the economy, also regional stability. We heard earlier, Mr. Kim had said that both sides will be focusing on a wide range of fields, including economy, trade, infrastructure, education, and saying that China will help North Korea towards modernization. Now, what does China want? China wants to consolidate relationship, especially amid uncertainty and especially with North Korea's increasingly close relationship to Russia. It also wants to show that it's able to engage major allies while also engaging its traditional allies as well, and also wants to leverage in its dealing with Mr. Trump, especially since Mr. Xi is likely to meet Mr. Trump in September, who likely wants to start diplomacy with North Korea again. What does North Korea want? North Korea wants secure economic support and trade, as well as diplomatic backing, with the fact that China has avoided fully enforcing sanctions on North Korea and has been providing aid.
Well, thanks very much for helping us unpack President Xi's visit to North Korea. Tan Si-hui there, reporting to us live from Beijing. Now, North Korea is one of the world's most isolated countries. Its pursuit of nuclear weapons has led to years of international sanctions on trade and financial transactions. But its economy is reportedly flourishing in ways not seen in years. North Korea does not release official economic data, but according to South Korea's central bank, Pyongyang's economy expanded 3.7% in 2024, its fastest rate in 8 years, all thanks in large part to its powerful friends. And of course, its most important lifeline is China. The manufacturing powerhouse provides food and consumer goods, from smartphones to electric vehicles. Perhaps more importantly, China is a source of industrial products which allow the North to do its own manufacturing, things like machinery, fuel, and access to supply chains. Without China, North Korea could struggle to import or make the essentials its economy needs. And this is best illustrated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Border closures caused a plunge in trade with China. According to Moscow's then ambassador to Pyongyang, even basic items like vegetable oil and sugar became scarce. Recent data show that China's trade with North Korea has rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. But increasingly, Pyongyang is also relying on another neighbor. Ties with Russia grew quickly after Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Pyongyang supplying munitions and even thousands of troops. According to a South Korean-based think tank, the Institute for National Security Strategy, Pyongyang's arms sales generated more than $10 billion from 2023 to the end of last year. And in return, North Korea secures its energy supply and access to sensitive military technology and construction materials. And we are going to be getting more insights into this rare visit later this hour when we speak to Associate Professor Chong Jia-yin from the National University of Singapore. Now, the denuclearization of North Korea remains a key concern for neighboring South Korea. President Xi Jinping says that Seoul should not abandon the goal of having Pyongyang give up its nuclear arms, even as he acknowledged that sanctions against the North over its weapons and nuclear program are not working.
지금 현재 제재라고 하는 거 아무 소용이 없다 지금. 러시아에서 다 들어왔다 지금. 중국도 사실은 잘 안 되는 것 같아요. 뭐 알 수는 없지만 어쨌든 그런 상황이다. 그래서 우리가 좀 현실적이 될 필요가 있겠다.
Mr. Yi added that there was no sign of better ties between the two sides, as he accused the previous government, under ousted leader Yoon Suk-yeol, of worsening tensions by directing drone flights across the border. The move heightened tensions at a time when dialogue had strained already frosty ties. Since 2023, Pyongyang has abandoned unification with the South as a national goal and views Seoul as its, quote, primary foe. Well, Mr. Yi, however, stressed that he had not given up on dialogue and says he remains hopeful on halting the build-up of North Korea's arsenal.
거의 마지막 지점에 이르렀다고 평가된다고 해요. 그래서 이거를 지금 현재 상태로 보면 계속 가면 어떻게 되냐? 계속 핵무기 늘어나고 ICBM 기술은 계속 완료 단계를 향해서 가죠. 좋은가요? 그냥 이렇게 계속 현재 현상을 유지하는 게 더 나빠지고 있잖아요, 점점.
At least 19 people are dead in the Philippines and more than 100 injured after a powerful 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck the south of the country this morning. Japanese, Filipino, and Indonesian weather agencies have since lifted tsunami alerts after the tremor sparked warnings across the region. Now, images circulating online showed damage to buildings in General Santos City, including a collapse of a roof in an elementary school, just as schools were reopening after a long break. Local authorities say several buildings and a key access bridge sustained damages. Now, the epicenter of the earthquake is 13 kilometers southwest of General Santos City on the island of Mindanao. It struck at 7:37 a.m. local time with a depth of 10 kilometers. Philippine officials issued evacuations in vulnerable coastal communities after the quake, following reports of waves of up to a meter along parts of the coastline. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center says that the threat of a destructive wave has now largely passed, but authorities still warn of sea level fluctuations and strong currents persisting for several hours. And Marijo Ramos, who is covering the story for CNA from Manila, tells us about the damage from the quake.
The situation is still developing, but authorities are now reporting casualties and significant damage following the powerful earthquake that struck off Mindanao this morning. Initial reports indicate fatalities, although officials are still verifying the exact death toll as search and rescue operations continue. The hardest hit area appears to be General Santos City, where building collapses, power outages, and infrastructure damage have been reported across several areas of southern Mindanao as well. Because today is the opening of public school in the Philippines, the Department of Education also deployed engineers in affected schools in the region. Search and rescue teams remain on the ground while strong aftershocks continue to rattle the region. Officials are also warning residents to avoid damaged structures as assessments continue, and the casualty figures could still rise in the coming hours.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, fares at Japanese airlines set to soar. CNA's Yasmin Yonkers speaks to top executives at the IATA annual general meeting in Rio. And toilet maker Toto says that it's business as usual as fears of material shortage ease. Oh, good to have your company on East Asia tonight. We've got Roland Lim now standing by with the very latest in business news. And let's talk about the markets today. Apparently, they're reacting to Friday's non-farm payroll blowout in the U.S., signaling a possible rate hike. Tell us more about that.
Yes, so Terry, and rate hikes in the U.S. typically negative for Asian equities. And Asian tech also faced additional headwinds from the Nasdaq sell-off. It's a sea of red in East Asian markets. That's with AI-related stocks losing steam after a sell-off in tech stocks on Wall Street. Tech heavyweights South Korea and Taiwan markets seeing their benchmarks plummeting amid a global rout. The Kospi index cratered at 8.3%, while the Taiwan-weighted index ending the day 3.5% in the red. The Nikkei also down 3.8%. After GDP data showed the economy lost momentum in the first quarter of this year. Chinese equity benchmarks also well into the red, with the second Wall Shenzhen component falling 3.2%, while the Hang Seng Index and the Shanghai Composite also losing steam more than 1% each. Let's take a look at individual tech stocks. SK Hynix down about 7.7%, while Samsung Electronics dropped more than 10% by the close. And in Taipei, TSMC closing nearly 3% in the red. Now, South Korea's won bounced back from a 17-year low after officials vowed to stabilize the currency yesterday. The currency fell to its lowest level since 2009 last week, before appreciating more than 1.6% today against the greenback. But the currency has been under persistent pressure over the past year due to global uncertainties brought on by the Trump administration's tariff regime. That's despite South Korea riding the AI boom, with the benchmark Kospi index seeing exponential growth, setting new highs this year and boosting the stock market up the leaderboard to as high as 6th place globally by market cap. Now, that boom should have strengthened the won, especially with the country's export-heavy economy, with exports last month surging more than 60% on the year, its highest rate in 4 decades, driven by semiconductors. Yet, the won is one of Asia's worst performing this year. So with booming stock market, why is the won still so weak? The country's central bank says there are several reasons. Surpluses that used to be channeled to bolster foreign exchange reserves are increasingly funneled into private sector investments. South Korea's rapidly aging population also plays a part, with households and institutions investing outside the country in search of better returns. The Iran war also weighing on the won via surging energy import costs. Now, South Korea imports around 99% of its oil, and the import bill for crude oil for the March to May period is 10.7% higher on year. Petroleum products imports also up more than 21% over the same period. All this on top of a $350 billion investment pledge as part of an agreement with Washington for lower tariffs. Now, that pledge fueling speculation of further pressures on the won, which would have to be sold in order to buy US dollars to fund investment projects in the US. A China securities regulator says that mainland investors with offshore brokerage accounts will not face forced account closures or asset liquidations. That's following concerns sparked by Beijing's recent crackdown on what it calls illegal cross-border securities trading. The China Securities Regulatory Commission, or CSRC, says it's targeting overseas brokers that illegally have mainland investors trade foreign stocks from within China. The clarification comes after confusion among investors over the fate of an estimated $54 billion held in offshore brokerage accounts. Fears of forced liquidation had triggered a sell-off in US-listed Chinese stocks after the crackdown was announced on May 22nd. The Chinese regulator says existing offshore accounts will remain open and investors' assets will be protected. However, brokers providing unauthorized services on the mainland will have 2 years to end those activities. Several mainline brokerages, including Tiger, Futu, and Longbridge, have already informed mainland clients that they will no longer be able to open new accounts, add positions, or transfer fresh funds from mid-June, although offshore services will continue. Toilet titan Toto says it will resume taking new orders for its prefabricated bathroom units from tomorrow, more than a month after it halted orders due to material shortages brought on by the Iran war. Bloomberg reports the Japanese toilet maker saying it's going back to its normal delivery schedule as the outlook on raw material supplies improve. The company halted orders in April, saying it faced a shortage of organic solvents that's used in its coatings. But the Japanese government has come out to reassure businesses that the country has enough naphtha supplies to last until next year. This as Japanese firms hoarded supplies of naphtha-derived chemicals, importing 3-year supply in April alone. Oil futures spiking more than 4% as the biggest oil shock in decades enter its 4th month with no resolution in sight. Brent now trading at around $97 a barrel, up 3.82% in Asian trade. U.S. market, West Texas Intermediate up by nearly 5%, $94.99 a barrel. The renewed strikes between Iran and Israel rattling the markets, diminishing hopes of a path to peace. Traders looking at a continued standoff over shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Meantime, the head of the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, says that the world must prepare for a future of constant disruptions as global shocks become more frequent. Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says that governments and institutions need to build stronger foundations to withstand recurring crises. She's also warned about the impact of artificial intelligence on jobs and communities, pointing to lessons from globalization and noting that many workers were left behind as industries disappeared. The IMF cut its global economic forecast back in April. International travel on Japan's biggest airlines is about to get more expensive. The latest surcharge hikes are among the steepest in years, raising expectations about how much more travelers are willing to pay. Now, CNA's Yasmin Younger spoke with the senior executives of Japan Airlines and ANA at the IATA annual general meeting in Rio about the move.
Higher fuel prices are once again testing the airline industry's recovery in Japan, where carriers say the rising cost of jet fuel is becoming harder to absorb, prompting another increase in fuel surcharges on international flights. But with travelers facing higher costs, the question is whether demand can remain resilient. Japan Airlines Senior Managing Executive Officer Ross Leggett weighs in.
So the calculation for our fuel surcharge is actually being pre-approved by the Japanese government. It's quite transparent, and we base it on the cost of Singapore kerosene. And then using our operational costs, we have a table of surcharges which we publish on the net. Anybody can see at what price the fuel is, then the fuel surcharge goes. So that very difficult balancing between increasing fares and reducing passenger demand. So far, we've been seeing no softness. The market has absorbed the increases so far, particularly for passengers arriving into Japan, so the inbound market for us, that the yen depreciation continues. So with a very depreciated currency, the market can absorb the increase so far.
ANA, it's also reporting little impact from the higher fuel surcharges. The airline says that first quarter bookings remain strong, particularly among business travelers, and that it's yet to see any meaningful decline in demand despite the increase in travel costs.
First quarter booking remained strong, while rising fuel costs are a challenge. Our hedge and updated surcharges will keep the immediate impact on our performance limited. Also, the impact of the weak yen is manageable and anticipated, as higher inbound revenues help cover our foreign expenses.
Both carriers say that demand remains strong for now, but airlines will be watching closely to see whether passengers continue to absorb the added expense in the months ahead.
And that's all for business. It's back to you, Telly.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Right, we're going to go for a short break now, with coming up next. Chinese President Xi Jinping hails ties with North Korea, calling the relationship invincible as he makes his first visit to the country in nearly 7 years. We're going to be speaking with an expert after the break to unpack what this renewed China-North Korea alignment could mean for regional security. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines you're following. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Pyongyang for key talks with Kim Jong-un, saying that he is willing to work together to bring ties to new heights while boosting exchanges in diplomacy, military, and law enforcement. At least 19 people dead and dozens injured after a powerful 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit southern Philippines. Japan, Philippines, and Indonesia have lifted tsunami alerts issued after the tremor triggered warnings across the region. Plus, South Korea plans a major overhaul of its election system to restore public trust. This after President Lee Myung said that ballot shortages in last week's local elections damaged the country's reputation as a model democracy. Now, Mr. Lee making those comments at a media conference to mark a year in office. He says he has called for a thorough investigation as young South Koreans take to the streets demanding a revote. A CNA senior correspondent, Lim Yun-suk, has more.
Young South Koreans handing out water bottles and drawing the Korean flag to gift to people who had come without one. These were some of the scenes in Seoul on Monday outside a vote counting center for last week's local elections. They have gathered here for days, demanding a revote, arguing that some South Koreans were deprived of their right to vote due to a shortage of ballots.
선거 과정에 있어서 부정 부패가 있었던 건 분명하고 그 과정에서 수사가 충분히 이루어져야 되고 투표를 멈춘 후에 이루어져야 되는데 그 과정에서 문제가 있었던 것 같습니다.
제가 잠실 주민인데 잠실동에서 투표 용지가 부족하다고 이제 그 참정권을 침해받는 일들이 많이 생겼었잖아요. 부정선거 의혹이 확신을 들면서 혼자 집에서 밤에 화가 많이 나 있었는데 잠실 7동에서 사람들이 모이기 시작해서 저도 이제 거기 참여하게 되었고.
As many as 30,000 protesters were estimated to have gathered here over the weekend. The rally brought together younger South Koreans regardless of ideology or party politics. In fact, they asked participants not to fly American flags, commonly seen at conservative election fraud rallies in South Korea, as they did not want to be associated with those groups. President Lee Myung, who held a media conference on Monday to mark his first year in office, called the shortage of ballot papers absurd. But he said he only realized the seriousness of the situation after learning of the rally by young South Koreans.
열 몇 명이 투표를 못했다는데 투표 결과 영향도 없고 라고 생각한 측면이 없지 않거든요. 청년들이 문제 제기를 하는 과정을 보면서 나도 참 민감도가 많이 떨어져 있는 거 아닌가? 원리 원칙에 대해서 민주공화국 대한민국의 주권 행사를 못하게 했다? 이거는 표의 숫자나 결과의 문제가 아니라
Mr. Lee did not mention anything about the calls for a revote, but said an investigation would be carried out.
우리가 할 수 있는 일이라고 하니 이게 혹시 범죄 혐의가 있는 거 아닐까? 해서 제가 그럼 최소한 진상은 밝혀봐야 되겠다. 일부러 그랬나? 또는 뭔가 근본적 구조적 문제가 있나? 알아야 될 거 아니에요.
Some protesters criticized President Lee's response, saying it was not strong enough.
어떤 특별한 사안이 생겼을 때 항상 적극적으로 말씀하시잖아요. 대통령께서 스타벅스 사건도 그랬고, 네, 스타벅스 사건에 비할 바 없이 훨씬 큰 일이 일어났는데 조용히 계신다는 게 좀 이해가 안 가고 납득이 안 됩니다.
While there is no evidence that the shortage of ballots altered the election result, many here say that misses the point. For them, the issue is whether every South Korean was given the opportunity to vote. And with President Lee now acknowledging the seriousness of the controversy, pressure is growing for answers over how such a failure could occur in one of Asia's most established democracies. Lim Yun-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Circling back to our top story now, Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Pyongyang for a rare summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Now, Mr. Xi says that ties between the two countries are at a new historical starting point and pledged deeper cooperation across political, economic and security fronts. Now, ahead of his two-day visit, North Korea has doubled down on its nuclear stance. Mr. Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, says that Pyongyang will never give up its status as a nuclear-armed state and will not tolerate any challenge to its sovereignty or security. Now, she also dismissed U.S. claims that Mr. Xi and President Donald Trump had agreed on the goal of North Korean denuclearization during summit talks last month. Now, those comments came just days after North Korean leader called for an exponential expansion of the country's nuclear arsenal. He has also reportedly ordered missile production capacity to be increased 2.5 times over the next 5 years. Pyongyang has carried out at least 8 missile tests this year, including systems reportedly capable of carrying nuclear warheads. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute says that North Korea now likely possesses around 60 nuclear warheads, up from about 50 a year ago. Right, for more insights into the significance of President Xi's visit to Pyongyang, we are joined now by Chong Jia-in, Associate Professor of Political Science at the National University of Singapore and a non-resident scholar with Carnegie, China. Well, thanks, Dr. Chong, for joining us yet again. Let's just talk about the big picture question here about Xi Jinping's visit coming shortly after hosting both Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Beijing. So can you just break down the calculations behind this visit and this meeting?
So I think at least the optics show that Xi Jinping is positioning himself to be a mover and shaker, at least in Northeast Asia, if not around the world. So you have these high-profile visits. Then he goes and does this visit of North Korea, which he hasn't done for a while. And of course, the fact that North Korea has been in the news with its nuclear program, I think, gives added emphasis to his visit. But of course, with leader visits, there's always going to be some moving around of schedules and things like that.
And also this raises a broader question about just how much influence Beijing still has over Pyongyang today. I just want to make a note about, you've recently said something about how North Korea, to quote you, it says, has its own mind and doesn't do things at anybody else's bidding, including Beijing. So help us understand, to what extent then can China still hold influence in North Korea's decisions when it comes to security and nuclear issues?
So Beijing will be influential. Just like Moscow would be influential. But I don't think they can override anything that Pyongyang has really decided to do. I think one quite interesting point is this whole issue of denuclearization. Purportedly, there were discussions about North Korean denuclearization in the talks between Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump. However, in the lead up to the Xi Jinping visit, North Korea had been talking up their nuclear program. And Xi Jinping, this morning, a document was released that Xi Jinping wrote about their relations. It mentioned nothing about denuclearization. So in that sense, if there was any thinking about denuclearization, at least in public, the PRC is not really able to, get the DPRK to commit to anything. They themselves are reluctant to put anything out in the public.
And Dr. Chong, we've often discussed China's leverage over North Korea, but how do you think North Korea's value to China has actually evolved in recent years? And some analysts are saying that, Kim Jong-un actually now have more leverage over China than many people actually realize. And I just thought I'd get your comments on that.
So I don't know about North Korea having leverage over the PRC in terms of making them do things, but certainly with the burgeoning relationship between the DPRK and Russia, the fact that the DPRK has provided Russia with ammunition, with troops in their aggression against Ukraine, means to say that they have a relationship with Russia where Russia is supplying them with oil, and they are getting money for these actions. So they are no longer as dependent as Beijing. So on Beijing as before. So in that sense, Beijing might see some of its leverage decreasing. In addition, I think if we go back to that document that was released earlier, Beijing was talking about Pyongyang in terms of anti-militarism and anti-hegemonism. So I guess what we can see there too is Beijing is trying to sort of present Pyongyang as a point of leverage against the United States, against Japan. At least that's what I would read into Xi's statements.
And also with North Korea, sometimes the symbolism can be as important as the substance. So I'm curious to know, what should observers, be watching out for in the optics, the protocol, and the public appearances surrounding this visit? For example, the big question is if Xi is going to meet Kim's daughter, for instance.
Right. So I suppose what a lot of that goes into is questions of succession in North Korea. So whether she meets Kim's daughter, there's a lot of talk around her potentially succeeding her father. I suppose we will also have to see what Kim Jong-un talks about. We have to see where the visits take place and the kinds of things that are brought out to show their relationship. One of the things that she mentioned for this visit is to commemorate the North Korea-China Mutual Assistance Treaty. In effect, their alliance. This is the only alliance that the PRC has. So the degree to which Kim reciprocates will be important to see.
Okay, well, we'll be looking out for that. But what about the region, though? I mean, policymakers in Seoul, Tokyo, and even the U.S., what do you think they are going to be watching out for during and before and after this visit?
So they'll be watching this visit closely to be expected. But I guess they will see what happens with North Korea's nuclear program, with its weapons program, and how North Korea responds to this whole anti-militarism, anti-hegemonism claim, because that language is sort of veiled, but it is clearly pointing towards the U.S., its alliance system, and Japan, the militarism bit, but that would also include South Korea. So I guess they will see, whether these words transform into anything concrete or whether it is a show for the North Korean domestic audience and for the Chinese domestic audience. So I think the action that comes after the words will be something that people will be watching.
Also, Dr. Chong, if we drill down into the relationship itself, when you look at China-North Korea today, what do you see as some of the greatest alignment, and where do you think also you see some of the greatest tensions?
So I think in terms of, North Korea and the PRC being, close partners, North Korea situated where it is with its weapons program, the fact that, it is able to be perhaps a harder face for this sort of anti-hegemonism, this sort of competition with the US, that's something that is in that relationship. Another is we've seen North Koreans, they've had their relationship before with the PRC, they would be a lot more dependent on PRC supplies, economic exchanges. Now that they have that Russian line opened up, I suppose they are in a position to demand a little bit more. So we'll see if any new arrangements come about, in addition to the sort of symbolism that is so rife in these meetings.
So just before I let you go, one quick question about what do you think Beijing ultimately hopes to get out of this visit? So if just one strategic objective that Xi Jinping could leave Pyongyang with, what do you think that would be?
I think to show that he's got friends and he's got leverage and he has ways of countering the U.S. alliance system. I mean, that's the whole sort of rivalry is something that's on top of Xi's mind. Remember his meeting with Trump? He was talking about the Thucydides trap. So he says he wants to avoid it, but to do so, I guess in Xi's mind is to do so from a position of strength rather than one of weakness.
Well, thanks for helping us understand what's really at stake for China, North Korea, and also the wider region. Good speaking with you. Chung Jia-in, there, Associate Professor of Political Science at the National University of Singapore and a non-resident scholar with Carnegie, China. Next, a Sweden-based watchdog says that the world is facing a heightened nuclear risk. Researchers warn that nuclear-armed states are increasingly taking atomic weapons out of storage and deploying them on delivery systems. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute says that the overall number of nuclear warheads have seen a marginal decrease to an estimated total of nearly 12,200. Now, 9,700, or about 80% of them, are stockpiled for potential use. SIPRI predicts that deployment of new nuclear weapons will increase, coinciding with what it says are worrying signs, such as the breakdown in strategic arms controls and nuclear weapons competition between great powers. Well, the Institute also highlighted the growth of China's nuclear arsenal. SIPRI estimates Beijing now has about 620 warheads and could have a number of intercontinental ballistic missiles rivaling the US and Russia by the year 2030. US President Donald Trump has demanded that Israel and Iran stop shooting. This comes after both sides renewed their exchange of fire for the first time since entering a ceasefire 2 months ago. In a Truth Social post, the U.S. leader said that both Israel and Iran are interested in an immediate ceasefire, while stressing that the blockade will remain fully enforced until a final deal is reached. He added that negotiations toward a peace agreement are ongoing. A siren sounded across Jerusalem this morning after the Israeli military warned of incoming missiles from Iran. Now, explosions were heard in central Israel as air defenses tried to shoot down the missiles. The latest exchange of fire began on Sunday when Iran launched missiles at Israel after an Israeli attack in Lebanon against Hezbollah, a militant group backed by Tehran. Israel has hit back, saying that it struck a petrochemical plant and military targets. The US President Donald Trump had reportedly urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to hold back from attacking Iran. Mr. Trump has insisted that the fighting will not derail Washington's peace talks with Tehran, saying a deal remains within reach. Coming up on East Asia Tonight, a 2,000-year-old institution faces an uncertain future. Japan's imperial family is shrinking, and lawmakers are weighing changes to secure the line of succession. Our correspondent in Tokyo joins us to break down what's at stake. Japan's imperial family is widely recognized as the world's oldest hereditary monarchy, and it goes all the way back about 2,000 years. But there are concerns that it might not last for much longer. Now, that's because the family is shrinking with only 16 members, and that's partly due to strict rules that govern who can remain in the family and who can succeed the throne. Japan's imperial household law stipulates succession through the male line. And this leaves only 3 possible heirs in this order: the emperor's younger brother, Crown Prince Akishino, Akishino's son, Prince Hisahito, as well as the emperor's uncle, 90-year-old Prince Hitachi. And to stabilize the size of the imperial family, the speakers and vice speakers of the Diet's upper and lower houses have today put together draft proposals that they presented to political parties. Well, for more on this, let's bring in CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. So, Michio, I mean, the imperial family at this point, it's still important because I remembered when Philippine President Marcos' recent meeting with the Japanese emperor, for instance, we were looking out for that because that sort of symbolized the highest level of diplomatic trust. So tell us more about the proposals and how important it is.
Sure, Otelli. Well, currently, a princess has to leave the imperial family upon marrying a so-called commoner. Now, there are 5 who are not yet married. And if they marry and leave their family, the imperial family will shrink to 11 members from 16. And imperial family members often grace events all over Japan, assume honorary titles of cultural and sports organizations, visit those displaced in society, including disaster victims. And less members could burden those remaining. Now, in the current imperial house law, the imperial family cannot adopt children. Another proposal is to allow adoption from former imperial family. Before World War II, there were 11 families other than the emperor's direct family. 51 left the imperial family after the war. Observers say there are 5 boys, but they will not be allowed to become heir to the throne.
Then help us understand this. I mean, how are they going to go about it? Because the most pressing issue right now is to secure heirs to the throne.
Well, speakers and their deputies of both houses of parliament want to keep the line of succession to the emperor's sons. First in line is Crown Prince Fumihito, or Akishino, his 19-year-old son, Prince Hisahito. And actually, third in line is Prince Hitachi, who's 90 years old and brother of Emperor Emeritus Akihito. He doesn't have any children. Now, I asked sociologist and author of books on the emperor, Professor Daisaburo Hashizume, on his take on proposals deliberated.
This proposal, they say, is not guarantee the permanent existence of the royal family, so I am disappointed. The female line is also possible to connect the royal succession. That is quite up to the sovereignty of Japanese nation.
Well, in the Constitution, the emperor's position derives from the will of the people with whom resides sovereign power. So Professor Hashizume thinks the line in the imperial house law, which states the throne shall be succeeded by a male offspring in the male line, can be revised. And the fact is, the law to allow only male lineage was stipulated by the government only in the late 1800s. there were 8 reigning empresses according to historic records.
So, Mitchell, I have to talk about Princess Aiko here. I mean, the 24-year-old, she's the only child of the current emperor and empress, very popular in Japan. So, in other words, you mean she is not a possible candidate then, being female?
Okay, let me tell you this. She is popular, and according to public opinion polls by Major Daily Asahi and Mainichi Shimbun conducted in May, 72% support a reigning empress. But regardless of public opinion, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told Parliament Prince Hisahito is the next generation successor, and this flow should not be disrupted. And in reality, there are concerns among analysts. This places great pressure on Prince Hisahito, the only possible heir of his generation. His wife must bear an heir if the lineage is to continue. And will anyone wish to marry a successor under so much pressure? If you recall, Michiko, who was a commoner, now the Empress Emerita, lost her voice for months. And Masako, who's the incumbent empress, she's a commoner, was diagnosed with adjustment disorder. And observers say it is very difficult for commoners to adapt to the imperial household system.
Well, there is a lot of pressure that the women in the family are facing. So let's just move forward now. What happens next? I mean, now that the proposals have been presented.
Well, speakers of both houses with political party members aim to finalize their proposal this Wednesday, then submit that proposals to Prime Minister Takaichi. The government should form a revised version of the imperial house law and submit it to the Diet. Now, Speaker of the lower house, Ace Gemori, told media today that he aims for Diet approval this Diet session, which ends on the 17th of July. So that's quite soon.
All right. Well, we'll certainly be looking out for that. Thanks very much for your insights. CNA senior correspondent Micho Ishida speaking to us from Tokyo. And on that note, we wrap up this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Hope you've enjoyed our content. For more, you can check out cna.asia, also on Facebook, YouTube, and all our socials. Thanks for watching, and see you again tomorrow.